A young woman enters the clinic, a routine patient for a standard checkup. But instead of receiving the usual results, she is given shocking news. She has only a week to live. The diagnosis is a rare and aggressive form of cancer, and no treatment will help. Faced with this truth, she decides to act. With no time left, she resolves to change her life. Determined not to give up, she embarks on an unexpected journey in search of meaning and forgiveness, even with time running out. The doctors tell her that fighting is futile, but she finds strength she never knew she had. And now, in her final days, she realizes that true salvation does not lie in treatment, but in how she chooses to live her last moments. He began typing into the computer, pulling up her previous medical records. Eliza sat back, her fingers nervously tapping the side of the examination table. She didn't expect anything unusual to come up, but still a small, inexplicable knot formed in her stomach. She tried to push the feeling aside, telling herself it was nothing more than a mild anxiety from the stress of her life lately. A few moments passed and Dr. Green's face tightened ever so slightly. His eyes narrowed as he scrolled through the results. Eliza noticed the change in his expression, but couldn't quite place what it meant. She waited, watching as his fingers paused over the keyboard. "Eliza," he said slowly, his voice now softer, more serious, "I'm going to need to send you for some additional tests." Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately sat up straighter, her attention fully on him. "Additional tests? What do you mean?" "It's nothing to worry about just yet," he replied quickly, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. "There's something in your blood work that I'd like to investigate further. It's probably nothing serious, but I need to make sure." Eliza nodded, though she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling deeper into her chest. It was only a few extra tests, surely no big deal. After all, she had always been healthy, always the picture of someone who took care of herself. Yet as she stared at Dr. Green's face, she saw something she hadn't seen before: concern. He was trying to remain calm, but the slight furrow in his brow and the way his gaze never quite met hers made her question his reassurances. "Don't worry, Eliza," he continued, sensing her rising anxiety. "It's just a precaution. We'll get it sorted quickly. I'll arrange for you to go down to the lab right now." Eliza stood up, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. She was still holding on to the thought that it was nothing, just a precaution. But why had his demeanor shifted? Why had he insisted on further testing so suddenly? The questions started to pile up in her mind, each one raising the volume of her anxiety. "Okay," she said, her voice betraying a slight tremor. "I'll do the tests. Just let me know what I need to do." Dr. Green gave her a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll have someone from the lab meet you downstairs. You're in good hands, Eliza. We'll take care of it." Eliza walked into the private clinic with a sense of calm, as if it were just another routine visit. She was 30, a woman of vitality and ambition, with a life full of challenges and responsibilities. Lately, things had been tough for her. Work pressures, personal doubts, but she never allowed herself to dwell on them for long. She had always been someone who faced obstacles head-on, ready to tackle anything life threw her way. This was no different. After all, it was just a checkup, a simple, ordinary task that most people in her position did without a second thought. Eliza left the room, her legs a little unsteady beneath her, the weight of uncertainty pressing down harder with each step. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had always been healthy, always in control, and yet now she was being thrust into a situation where she had no control. She walked down the hallway, her thoughts a blur. As she approached the elevator, she tried to tell herself that everything was fine, that it was just a routine thing, something to clear up and move on from. But deep down, she felt that the world she had known, the world where she controlled every aspect of her life, was slipping away. Eliza sat on the sterile examination table, her hands gripping the sides as she anxiously waited for the results of the tests. Her heart raced in her chest, thudding against her rib cage with a force that seemed louder than ever before. She had been calm earlier, convincing herself that it was just a precaution, that everything would be fine. But now, as the minutes dragged on, a sinking feeling had taken root deep within her, something she couldn't ignore. She tried to steady herself, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. It was strange. She had always prided herself on being the type of person who handled challenges with grace, who faced problems head-on. But this was different. This was not just another checkup. Her thoughts were racing, spiraling. She tried to tell herself that it was nothing serious, that maybe there was just an anomaly in her results, but the doubt that had crept in wouldn't leave her. She glanced at the door several times as if willing the doctor to come in quickly, to put an end to the uncertainty. But when Dr. Green finally entered, it wasn't with the calm, reassuring smile she had expected. His face was serious, his expression hard to read, but there was an undeniable tension in his demeanor. As he sat across from her, he looked down at the folder in his hands, flipping through her results with quiet focus. His eyes skimmed the pages, his fingers moving slowly, almost as if he were gathering his thoughts. Eliza sat frozen, watching his every move. The seconds felt like hours. Her breath became shallow and her palms began to sweat. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, Dr. Green looked up from the folder. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, Eliza saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. She didn't understand it at first, but it lingered in his eyes for just a moment before he spoke. The words that followed struck her like a physical blow. He explained that the test had revealed an aggressive form of cancer. Her body went numb as the reality of his words began to sink in. She felt the room closing in on her, the walls pressing tighter and tighter, and the world outside the clinic suddenly seemed distant, out of reach. The air felt thick and heavy, each breath more difficult than the last. It took a moment for her to process what he had said. A few days, maybe a week, those were the words that echoed in her mind. She didn't believe him. She couldn't. She had always been healthy. She exercised regularly, ate well, lived a balanced life. This couldn't be happening. This was some mistake, some cruel error in the system. She was too young, too full of life for this. But Dr. Green was firm, his voice steady as he continued. He told her that there was a chance, barely a chance, but a chance nonetheless, that she could survive. He explained that the treatment options were available, though they were aggressive, complex, and would take time. The treatment itself would be grueling, with no guarantees of success, but there was still hope, however small. Eliza couldn't wrap her mind around it. Hope? How could there be hope when the reality of her diagnosis was so brutal, so final? Her hands trembled, and she clasped them tightly in her lap to steady herself. The words palliative care floated in the air, and when Dr. Green said them, it was as if the world around her went still. Palliative care. He was suggesting that the only option left was to manage her pain, to make her comfortable in the time she had left. The clinic was modern and pristine, a typical private healthcare setting. The walls were a soothing light color, the floors polished, and the air crisp with the faint scent of antiseptic. Eliza had been here before, but today felt different, although she couldn't quite put her finger on why. The reception staff greeted her with their usual warmth, and she was soon led to a small, comfortable examination room. She sat on the sterile, white paper-covered table, waiting for the doctor. She adjusted her outfit, running her fingers through her hair, trying to shake off the small sense of unease that had settled in her chest. It was nothing, just the usual pre-appointment nerves. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shout at him that this couldn't be true, that there had to be another way. But the words stuck in her throat, trapped by the heavy weight of her disbelief. She looked at the doctor, her eyes searching his face for any hint of uncertainty, any glimmer of hope that might be hiding behind his calm exterior. But there was nothing. His face was set, his posture rigid. He wasn't giving her false hope. He was being honest, brutally so. Eliza stood up abruptly, as if to escape the reality that had suddenly crushed her. She walked toward the window, trying to focus on something, anything to ground herself. The city stretched out before her, the buildings, the cars, the people, all moving in their ordinary rhythm, as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Her life was no longer hers to control. Everything she had known, every certainty, had been shattered. She gripped the edge of the windowsill, her knuckles turning white. The tears she had been holding back finally broke free, but she didn't let herself sob. Instead, she stood there, quietly crying, her face turned away from the doctor, as if hiding her vulnerability from him. She was ashamed of the weakness she felt, ashamed that she couldn't accept the truth he had laid out for her. Dr. Green stood quietly behind her, his presence not intrusive but comforting in its own way. He gave her the space she needed, allowing her time to process the news. But Eliza couldn't process it. She couldn't accept that this was her reality now. She wanted to believe it was a mistake. She wanted to fight it, to push it away. She had always been a fighter, hadn't she? But now in the face of something so much bigger than herself, she felt small and helpless. For the first time in her life, she realized that she couldn't control everything. She couldn't control this. The doctor eventually spoke again, but Eliza didn't hear him. She was lost in her own mind, consumed by the magnitude of the situation. She had spent her whole life planning, moving from one goal to the next, checking off boxes, always thinking that there would be more time. But time was now her enemy. Time had become her greatest limitation. Her mind raced with thoughts of the people she loved, her family, her friends, the colleagues she had spent years working alongside. Would she get to say goodbye? Would she be remembered for the person she had been? Or would she be reduced to a fleeting memory? Would the world continue to turn without her, just as it had before? And in the quiet, still room, with the harsh reality of her diagnosis settling in, Eliza made a decision. She wouldn't go down without a fight. No matter how small the chance of survival, she would take it. But even as she clung to that decision, a deep, aching part of her wondered if the battle was already over. Eliza arrived home, her mind still reeling from the devastating news. The weight of the diagnosis felt like an anchor, pulling her deeper into despair with every passing minute. The front door closed behind her with a soft click, but the silence inside her apartment felt deafening. She stood in the hallway for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings, but they all seemed foreign now, as if her life had shifted out of alignment. Everything she had known, everything she had worked for, suddenly felt irrelevant. The walls seemed to close in on her as she found herself standing in front of a mirror, her reflection staring back at her. But it felt as though she was looking at someone else. Her eyes were swollen, and her face had lost its usual vibrancy. The reality of her situation had yet to fully sink in, but the reflection in the mirror was a stark reminder that everything had changed. Her thoughts were a blur, and for the first time in a long time, she couldn't find the clarity that had always come so easily. Dr. Green entered the room with a polite smile. He was in his late 40s, a man who had seen it all in his many years of practice. His calm, composed demeanor was both reassuring and slightly intimidating. He had an air of quiet confidence about him, and Eliza had always found comfort in his steady professionalism. She had seen him several times before, but today something in his gaze seemed different. She didn't know how long she stood there staring at herself, trying to make sense of the woman she saw before her. She felt detached, as though the woman in the mirror was someone she used to know but had long since lost touch with. The woman who had ambition, drive, and a sense of certainty about the future. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who had no idea what her life would look like a week from now or even a day from now. Her mind kept returning to the diagnosis, to the cold reality that she had mere days left. The doctors had given her a week, maybe less. What could she possibly do with such little time? The thought of her impending death filled her with a deep, suffocating fear. It wasn't just the fear of the physical pain, though that was certainly part of it. It was the fear of leaving things undone, of never having truly lived, of never having made peace with the things that haunted her. As the weight of the moment settled heavily in her chest, Eliza knew that she could not sit idly by and wait for time to slip away. There had to be more to her final days than simply waiting for the inevitable. The thought of facing death without having made amends, without having taken action, was unbearable. So she decided she would make use of whatever time she had left. Eliza took a deep breath and walked over to the desk where her phone lay. The cold, hard truth was that she had been putting things off for too long. She had neglected relationships, abandoned connections, and avoided confronting the unresolved issues in her life. All of that needed to change now. Sitting down at the desk, she took the phone in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She scrolled through her contacts, pausing briefly at the names of people she had lost touch with over the years. Friends, colleagues, family members, some who had drifted away because of petty disagreements, others because of her own pride and stubbornness. She felt a pang of guilt as she scrolled past each name, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of urgency. There was no time to waste on pride anymore. She needed to make things right, to apologize to those she had hurt, to reconcile with the people she had once loved. The thought of doing this, of reaching out to the people who had been part of her life, felt like an overwhelming task. But it was a task that had to be done. She picked up her phone and began typing messages one after another. Some were to old friends she hadn't spoken to in years, some to family members she had distanced herself from after a disagreement. The words were simple at first, an apology, a request for forgiveness. But as she typed, something inside her shifted. The more she wrote, the more she realized that these apologies weren't just for the people she had wronged. They were for herself, too. She had spent so much of her life focused on achieving success, on pushing forward without ever truly reflecting on the people and relationships that mattered most. And now, with so little time left, she understood that these connections were the things that would define her, not her career or her accomplishments. After sending the messages, she sat back in her chair, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. The first reply was from a childhood friend she hadn't seen in years. The message was short but warm, a simple acknowledgement of her apology. The second reply was from her mother, a response that was much more emotional. Her mother had always been a steady presence in her life, and Eliza had taken that for granted. As she read her mother's message, a tear slipped down her cheek. For a moment, Eliza felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to rebuild something meaningful. She thought about how she had lived her life, always focused on the future, always rushing toward the next goal. But now she realized that what mattered most was not what lay ahead, but the moments she could create in the time she had left. The next few days passed in a blur. Eliza met with the people she had reached out to, some in person, some over the phone. There were tears, there were apologies, and there was laughter. Slowly, she began to feel like she was closing the gaps in her life, stitching together the parts of herself she had ignored or abandoned. Each conversation was a step toward healing, not just for the people around her, but for herself. "How have you been, Eliza?" he asked, settling into his chair with a clipboard in hand. But even as she worked through her past, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something more was required. She was confronting her past, but there was still a part of her that wasn't at peace. She realized that, in order to truly let go, she would need to forgive herself. She had always been her own harshest critic, holding herself to impossibly high standards. And now, in the face of her own mortality, she understood that the greatest gift she could give herself was the ability to forgive, to release the burdens of guilt and regret that had weighed on her for so long. Eliza took one last look at herself in the mirror, this time with a sense of clarity. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the clinic days ago. She wasn't the same person who had been consumed by fear and uncertainty. She had changed, and in that change, she found peace. Eliza sat at a small corner table in the cafe, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea as she gazed out the window. The familiar buzz of voices and clinking cups filled the air, but it all felt distant, as if she were removed from the life she once led. It had been years since she had seen most of her old colleagues, but she had reached out to a few of them in the past days. She needed closure. She needed answers. And so here she was, meeting them one by one, facing the ghosts of her past. As she waited, her thoughts wandered back to the time when she had worked in the corporate world. The long hours, the tension, the constant pressure. It had been a time of ambition, but also of exhaustion and disappointment. When she had lost her job, it had felt like a betrayal, a sharp sting that had stayed with her for months. She never fully understood what had happened, why she had been let go. It had felt so personal, so unjust. Her mind drifted back to those days, the confusion, the disbelief. But here now, with so little time left, she realized that perhaps it was time to face it head on. One of her former colleagues, Alex, entered the cafe, his face lighting up as he saw her. It had been a long time, but he still looked the same. A little older, a little grayer, but the same friendly smile. They greeted each other awkwardly at first, both aware of the passage of time and the distance between them. But as they sat down and exchanged pleasantries, Eliza could feel the weight of the unspoken between them. They spoke about work, about life, about the things they had done since their paths had diverged. But then Alex's tone changed. He leaned forward, his eyes searching her face as if trying to gauge her reaction. Eliza felt a shift in the air, a tension she couldn't explain. She had known Alex well during their time together at the company, but she never expected him to say what came next. He told her that when she had lost her job, it hadn't been because of her performance, her mistakes, or anything she had done. The truth, as he explained, was that her firing had been part of a corporate maneuver, a manipulation orchestrated by her superiors. He revealed that there had been a power struggle within the company, and she had been made a scapegoat, a pawn in a much larger game. The mistake she had made, the one that had led to her termination, was not hers at all. It had been a mistake made by someone higher up in the ranks, and they had needed someone to blame. And so, they had blamed her. Eliza sat frozen, the words hitting her like a physical blow. She stared at Alex, her mind racing to process what he had just revealed. She had always believed that her firing had been the result of her own inadequacies, of something she had done wrong. But now, hearing Alex's words, the reality of the situation began to unfold in her mind. The years of guilt, the shame she had carried, all the sleepless nights spent wondering what she could have done differently, were suddenly shattered. She had been wronged, used, discarded in a way she never could have imagined. The shock of the revelation left her speechless for a moment. Her heart raced and her breath felt shallow. She wanted to scream, to shout in anger and disbelief. How could this have happened? How could they have done this to her? The years of feeling worthless, of doubting her abilities suddenly seemed so unjust. It was all a lie. She had been betrayed. But as the words sank in, Eliza realized that anger would not help her now. She had lived with this burden for so long, but the truth was now out in the open. The injustice of it all was undeniable, but it was no longer something she could change. As the conversation continued, Eliza's mind began to shift. She thought of the life she had led, the decisions she had made, the people she had tried to please. For so long, she had blamed herself for her downfall. But now she understood that the circumstances surrounding her job loss were beyond her control. The manipulation, the corporate games, none of it had been her fault. She had been a victim of forces she couldn't have predicted or fought against, and yet she had carried the weight of it for years, allowing it to define her. "Good, just busy," she replied with a forced smile, feeling the weight of her own exhaustion that she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. She had been working nonstop, trying to prove herself at her job and pushing herself to keep moving forward. But in that moment, as she sat in front of him, she realized how worn out she truly felt. Maybe this checkup wasn't just a formality after all. But now, with the diagnosis of her illness, Eliza found herself facing a new kind of truth. What had happened in the past, as painful as it was, no longer seemed as important as it once had. She realized that in the face of her own mortality, the conversation with Alex had shaken her to the core, but it also gave her a sense of clarity. She understood that she couldn't change the past, no matter how much she wanted to. She could not undo the wrongs that had been done to her, and she could not rewrite the chapters of her life that had already been written. But what she could do was change how she lived now. In the moments she had left, she could forgive herself for the things she had carried, for the mistakes she had thought were hers alone. She could find peace in the knowledge that she had done the best she could with the hand she had been dealt. As she left the cafe and walked out into the crisp evening air, Eliza felt a sense of quiet determination. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had been wronged, yes, but that was not all she was. She was still Eliza, and she still had the power to choose how she would spend her remaining time. The past no longer had the hold on her that it once did. With each step she took, she felt herself moving further away from the pain and closer to the peace she so desperately needed. As the evening sky painted the city in shades of deep purple and soft gold, Eliza walked through the park, her steps slow and deliberate. The crisp air brushed against her face and the sounds of the city seemed to fade away, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. The park had always been a place of solace for her, a quiet retreat from the noise of the world. It was here, years ago, that she had met him, her first love. The memories flooded back as she walked along the familiar paths, her thoughts drifting to a time when everything had felt simpler, when her heart had been lighter and full of hope. Back then, she had been young, naive even, but there had been something about him that had captivated her. They had shared so many moments in this very park, talking about their futures, dreaming of the life they would build together. But those dreams had been shattered long ago. The love they had shared had ended in heartbreak, leaving her with a lingering ache that had never fully healed. As she walked, the memories of that time felt distant, like another life, another version of herself. The park was peaceful now, almost serene in the fading light. She sat on a bench by the fountain, her eyes scanning the surroundings. It had been years since she had come here alone, but now, with the weight of her diagnosis pressing down on her, she felt the need to reconnect with this place, to find a sense of peace amidst the memories that still clung to her. The world felt different now, as if time had slowed down just enough for her to notice the small things she had once overlooked. The sound of the water splashing in the fountain, the chirping of birds settling in the trees, the scent of the earth and fresh grass. It all seemed so vivid, so real. As she sat there lost in thought, she saw a familiar figure walking toward her. It took a moment for her to recognize him, but when she did, her heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing before her. Her old love, the one who had once meant everything to her. The years had changed him, just as they had changed her. He had aged, his hair now graying at the temples, his face marked by time and experience. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't changed. The same warmth, the same familiarity that had drawn her to him all those years ago. They stood in silence for a moment, neither knowing what to say. The years had passed, but the connection between them was still there, hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. Eliza felt a mixture of emotions, nostalgia, regret, and an overwhelming sense of finality. She had spent so many years holding on to the past, replaying the hurt and the loss, never quite able to let go. But now, with the knowledge that her time was limited, she realized that holding on to the past no longer served her. She had to let go, to forgive and to find peace. They talked for a while, but the words didn't seem as important as the silence between them. In the stillness, they both understood what had been left unsaid. Eliza found herself thinking of forgiveness, not just for him, but for herself. She had spent so much time blaming herself for the things that had gone wrong, for the ways her life had turned out differently than she had planned. But now, with the weight of her illness looming over her, she realized that forgiveness was not about absolving anyone of guilt. It was about setting herself free. The past no longer held the power to control her. She had to forgive, not for him, but for her own peace of mind. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the park, Eliza understood that true freedom did not come from winning or conquering. It came from letting go of the burdens that weighed her down, from accepting the things she couldn't change and finding the courage to move forward, even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. He nodded thoughtfully, looking at her medical history on the screen in front of him. Any concerns you'd like to mention today? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Eliza knew that she had made her peace with the past, the love she had shared with him, the mistakes they had both made, and the years they had spent apart. All of it was part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She had taken control of her own narrative, choosing to let go of the anger, the regret, and the pain that had held her captive for so long. With a final lingering glance at the man she had once loved, Eliza stood up and walked away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The park, the memories, and the past were now behind her. What mattered now was how she would spend the time she had left, and she was determined to live it with the peace she had found in forgiveness. As she walked toward the city, the world felt different, quieter, gentler, as if she had finally come home to herself. Eliza lay quietly in the sterile white bed of the hospital room, the soft beep of the monitors providing a rhythmic background to the stillness of the space. Her face, once filled with anxiety and fear, now held an expression of peaceful acceptance. The room was dim, the soft glow of the early morning light just beginning to filter through the window blinds. She had spent so many nights staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the weight of her diagnosis, the fear of what was to come. But now in these final hours, she had come to a place of calm, of quiet understanding. The days had blurred together in the hospital, a mix of tests, treatments, and visits from doctors and nurses, all trying to prolong her life. But Eliza had stopped thinking about the fight. She no longer clung to the hope that there was some miracle cure, some way to escape the inevitable. Instead, she had begun to focus on what truly mattered: her inner peace, her ability to let go of the pain and regret that had weighed so heavily on her for so long. She had made peace with her past, with the mistakes she had made and the wrongs she had suffered, And now, with the reality of her situation staring her in the face, she had found the strength to embrace it. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Eliza closed her eyes and let the warmth of the morning light wash over her. She wasn't afraid anymore. There was no more fear of the unknown, no more dread of what would come next. The physical pain she had experienced in the days leading up to this moment had faded, replaced by a sense of deep, quiet acceptance. Her body was weak, but her mind was clear, and her heart was full of a quiet gratitude for the life she had lived, for the people she had loved, and for the lessons she had learned. The door to her room opened gently, and Dr. Green entered, his footsteps soft against the floor. He paused for a moment when he saw her, his eyes taking in the peaceful expression on her face. There was no sign of the fear or confusion that had once filled her when she first received the diagnosis. Instead, he saw a woman who had made her peace with what was happening, who had found a quiet strength that he hadn't seen in her before. He approached her bedside, his hand reaching out to check her vitals. As he did, he looked at her, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It wasn't the smile of a doctor who had done all he could to save a patient, but the smile of someone who recognized that this woman had found something much more important than just survival. She had found the courage to live in the face of death, to accept the inevitable without fear or regret. It was a smile of respect, of understanding. Eliza's eyes fluttered open as she felt his presence beside her. She met his gaze and offered a small, serene smile. There was no need for words between them. They both understood that the struggle was over, and that what remained was not a battle, but a quiet acceptance of what had been. Eliza had fought in her own way, not with medicines or treatments, but with her heart. She had chosen to live her final days with grace, with forgiveness, and with a deep sense of peace. As the doctor quietly adjusted her IV and checked her monitors, Eliza felt herself growing drowsy. She had no intention of fighting the sleep that was beginning to take over. She welcomed it, knowing that this was the natural next step in her journey. She wasn't afraid of what lay ahead, for she had already made her peace with it. Her heart was calm, her mind at rest. She had let go of all the things that had once haunted her. The fear of failure, the regrets over lost opportunities, the anger over the injustices she had faced. All of that had been released, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had lived, for the love she had shared, and for the lessons that had come through her trials. As she drifted off to sleep, the last thing she felt was a sense of freedom, not from her illness, but from the emotional burdens that had once held her captive. She had let go of the past, embraced the present, and found a way to make peace with her fate. Her body may have been failing her, but her soul had found peace. Eliza shook her head, still under the impression that this was just another standard visit. "No, nothing out of the ordinary," she said, her tone casual, almost dismissive. The morning light outside grew brighter, casting its gentle warmth over her as she slept. The hospital room, once filled with the sterile, clinical energy of illness and treatment, now felt serene, almost sacred. It was a space of quiet reflection, a space where Eliza had found the true meaning of healing, not in the physical body, but in the spirit. As the hours passed and the day unfolded, Eliza's body rested, but her soul had already transcended the pain. She had learned the ultimate lesson, that healing isn't always about fixing what's broken, but about finding peace, letting go, and accepting life as it comes with all its beauty and its imperfection. And in that acceptance, she had found the freedom she had been searching for all along. Dr. Green studied her with a slight frown. He seemed to be calculating something in his mind before finally speaking. "I'll take a look at your test results from the last time you came in. It's always good to keep track of everything."